Practical steps for setting up a new limited company following liquidation. Okay, so the first thing I want to say is that it must be done properly. So the old company, as it were, has entered into liquidation and you're setting up a new company, and it's absolutely vital we do it on good, solid setting. We want it to be successful and it starts immediately, so we're going to do it properly. So the first thing you're going to need is a limited company, and when you're setting up a limited company, whether or not you instruct an accountant to do that or you do it yourself, you need to be careful of the name that you pick, because the company that's entered into liquidation, there's going to be restrictions around you as a director in using a similar sounding name. You're best speaking to someone like myself, a licensed insolvency practitioner, as to what those restrictions are, what the exceptions are, what names you can use, etc. Let a professional help you with that, but you need to be careful as to the name that you pick. So you set up your new limited company. You then need to make sure that you're registered for VAT if you want to be, or if you meet the criteria, any licenses that you need, etc. Because you have to remember that most of that will have died with the old company that you've liquidated. So you have to think what it is you need. Are there any licenses? Do you need to be registered for VAT? Should you be registered for VAT, etc. So you need to make sure you've got everything set up and ready. An accountant can help you with that, of course. And then what you also need to make sure is with the new company that you've got finance and capital behind yourself, because it might be that you're buying the assets of the company that's entered into liquidation. You can't just take them. You would have to buy them at fair value. You can't be either taking the assets over for no value or no consideration, or offsetting it against money that you're owed, or selling it to yourself for £1. Those things don't work. You've got to buy the assets properly and carefully. Again, speak to someone like me. We help you with that. We can do all the paperwork and we can get a valuer involved, etc. We can take all care of that for you, but you have to make sure that you've got the working capital to be able to afford to buy it. All new businesses need some sort of capital or finance, depending on what it does, but it generally does need it. So make sure you've got that, and just be aware that you cannot transfer anything over. And then make sure that you've got a good accountant. Obviously I understand that when a company goes into liquidation, it's factors outside of the director's control usually, or even if there were, hiccups along the way, the directors learn from it, and it makes the second company a lot stronger. But what can really help is having a good accountant behind you, advising you, making sure that you're aware of everything, because I've had it where I've dealt with liquidations and the directors didn't know what an overdrawn director's loan account was, i.e. where you owe money to the company, and this can be a nasty surprise. They just weren't aware of it. So make sure that you've got a good accountant. And then with the assets, as I said previously, you've just got to make sure that you are entitled to use the assets, that they have been transferred over correctly, that they have been bought, whether that's by invoice, sale agreement, etc. We can take care of all of that for you, but just make sure you've done it correctly, and make sure they're insured as well, because the insurances of your old company, the one that's entered into liquidation, most likely won't transfer over. There'll be a liquidation termination clause in there, so make sure your assets are insured. And then finally, what I would say is, it's great that there's this new company that you're excited for, and hopefully the employees are as well, because you might have taken them on and they're in employment again. And the suppliers, hopefully, they want to, I know it's not nice that they're owed money from the old company, but they might be willing to do business with you, so it should be a positive, good thing going forward. But what you have to make sure is that although your energies are on the new company, and I understand that with the liquidation that you cooperate with the liquidator if they've got any outstanding queries, because what you don't want is anything to happen with the liquidation where you're ignoring the liquidator, you're not cooperating, you're not explaining things, for any of that to come back and bite you with the new company. So just make sure that you do always deal with the liquidator. But we are here to advise, we're here to help the directors, we're here to handle the liquidation, and we're here for the creditors as well. And so we just have to make sure everything is done properly, as I said. But those are my practical tips for setting up a limited company following liquidation. So make sure you do everything properly. Take advice from someone like myself. Set up your new limited company, make sure that you have VAT if you need it, you're registered for VAT, make sure you've got your licences if that's applicable, you know, whether or not you need to be registered with the ICO, FCA, those sort of things. You know what you need in your business, but make sure you have those. Don't assume that you've just carried them over from the new from the company that's entered into liquidation, because most likely they've terminated through the liquidation process. So make sure the new company has all of those things that you need, and then make sure that you've got enough finance and capital to give a good start to the company, and that you can fund it going forward, and that you can buy assets if that's what you're doing. And make sure that you've got a good accountant who can help you. And finally, just make sure that you've got the that you've bought all the assets if that's what you're doing properly from the liquidator, or you know, they've not been transferred over. And then finally, make sure that you cooperate with the liquidator in regards to the old company and any queries that they have. So those are my practical tips. Okay, thank you.